But first, I'm joined by Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp. Mr Philp, great to see you this morning. Thank you for your time. I would imagine that as Shadow Home Secretary, you're making inquiries about the whereabouts of Abu Wadii. This story appears on the front of the Mail on Sunday. I'm sure you're familiar with it. He was picked up by the UK Border Force on Thursday. He has previously called for the slaughter of all Jews. He's been photographed with AK-47s. He's a former member of Hamas. Do we think the Home Office knows where this guy is?
Well, I'll certainly be asking the Home Office that question. What the Home Office needs to do is identify where this despicable individual is and, frankly, remove him from the country back to Palestine immediately. He clearly has no place in the United Kingdom and potentially poses a threat to our fellow citizens. And this just illustrates why it is so important to get control of our borders and to stop these boat crossings. Unfortunately, since the general election, these boat crossings under Labour have gone up by about 28%. And these are the kind of people that Labour are now letting into the country.
Although, can we just have a frank admission? Because, to be fair to him, the former Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, did say this week. No government can stop the boats, can they, Mr Philp? The Tories didn't manage it. Labour aren't managing it now.
Well, Labour have completely lost control, as I said, and the numbers have gone up.
Did the Tories ever have control?
The Rwanda deterrent had it. Yeah, well, I'm just about to say, so the crossing numbers did actually go down in 2023. We did start getting the numbers down. And if the Rwanda deterrent had started as planned on the 24th of July last year, that was when the first flight was due to take off, then I think that deterrent would have worked. It stands to reason. If you're an illegal immigrant in France and you know if you cross the English Channel by dinghy to the UK, you are then going to get pretty much immediately removed somewhere else, be it Rwanda or elsewhere, then you're not going to bother crossing, are you? Now, we saw Australia about 10 years ago make a similar plan work. They called it Operation Sovereign Borders. We in government started returning Albanians back to Albania. They were the largest nationality crossing the channel, and when we started returning them, it went down by 93%. So those examples go to show that if you rapidly remove people that arrive, then they don't attempt the crossing in the first place. And that is why it was such a catastrophic mistake by the Labour government to cancel the Rwanda deterrent before it even started.
It could have been a catastrophic mistake by the Conservatives not to have got a grip on this issue earlier. We now have Sunak saying that we should leave the ECHR unless it is reformed and that we can't afford net zero. Why didn't he say this while he was in office? Why didn't the Tories bring in the Rwanda plan years ago if that was the way to stop the boats?
Well, obviously, the Rwanda plan was repeatedly challenged in the courts, and we had to actually pass a special bill through Parliament about a year ago called the Safety of Rwanda Act, which, by the way, the Labour government are about to repeal, which I think is a really stupid thing to do, because it means that if Labour do ever come to their senses and change their mind and decide to restart start the Rwanda scheme, as they should do, they will have destroyed the legislative, the legal basis to do so. So I can tell you now,
you could have done that, though. While the Tories were in office, while the Tories were in office, you could have repealed the Human Rights Act. This was a Tony Blair invention that has led to legal warfare against legitimate government policies by elected politicians. You could have done all this, and you didn't, and now we're in this mess.
So look, I mean, the case law coming out of the courts, including actually, or principally, in fact, UK courts, has got kind of worse and worse over the years. And it has, in my view, now got to the point where we do have to essentially disapply the Human Rights Act or repeal the Human Rights Act in relation to immigration matters. And that's an announcement Kemi and I are making this morning. And tomorrow, Monday, I will be tabling an amendment in Parliament to Labour's border bill, I call it the border surrender bill, to do exactly this. We're going to put it to a vote in committee firstly and then on the floor of the whole House, and we'll see if Labour will support our proposal. I will be voting in favour of it.
Well, they're not going to,
because
are
we've
they?
had for too long now judges. Well, it's up there. We'll put them to the test. I'll be voting for it. I can tell you
You could have done this while you were in office with an 80-seat majority.
Look, Camilla,
you had the power then.
Yeah, as I
say,
say,
now you've lost it. And now you're retrospectively trying to repeal the Human Rights Act when it comes to immigration. It doesn't make any sense.
So, Camilla, Camilla, these cases over the years have got worse and worse and worse. We've seen just in the last few weeks, Charles Hymas at the Telegraph and Matt Dayton at the Times exposing some of these recent judgments. So it's a problem that's been getting worse even in the last few months, let alone even the last few years.
Okay.
But frankly, looking back, yes, I would have wanted to repeal it. But look, we've got new leadership. We've got a new leader of the Conservative Party. You've got a new Shadow Home Secretary, which is me. And we are now proposing decisive action in this area. I'm going to be tabling that amendment tomorrow, and I'm going to be voting for it in Parliament.
Let's be decisive. You can tell me then, you've committed to a strict cap on immigration. What is it?
Well, I'm not going to shoot from the hip. We're going to come up with a properly thought out number in due course, long ahead of the next election.
What is the number? You have had a long time to think of the number. You were in power for 14 years. You've now been in opposition for 6 months.
Camilla, we're not gonna...
You must have a figure in your mind. What should immigration be capped at? We can all have a figure. I'm going to come up with one now and see whether this is feasible. 100,000.
Yeah, well, Camilla, I'm not going to shoot from the hip and just pluck a number out of thin air. I've been Shadow Home Secretary for just 3 or 4 months, so I'm not just going to shoot from the hip. We are going to think this through properly so it's credible. You know, we saw, Reform is a party that just shoots from the hip and doesn't think things through, as Rupert Lowe
admitted it's been clear
last week. I'm not going to do that.
At least Reform's been clear. It said net zero migration. It's really clear.
Camilla, I'm going to think this. But by the way, that still implies about 500,000 people coming in each year. By the way,
okay.
So look,
is that
I'm going to
too
think
many?
this through properly. I'm not going to shoot from the hip. What I will tell you is the number will be a lot lower than it has been recently, and a lot lower than recent forecasts.
Well, I would have hoped so. It's recently been 900,000.
And we're going to let me finish. And we're going to put down another amendment in Parliament creating the legal mechanism for MPs every year to vote on what the legal cap should be. And again, we'll see if Labour vote for that or not. So we're going to create that legal mechanism for Parliament to decide, and then when the cap is met, the government would simply stop issuing new visas. So that's a proper legal mechanism that will have real teeth.
All right. I mean, I think people might be suspicious because you won't come out with the actual number. I appreciate you've been burned by the tens of thousands pledge.
Long ahead of the next election, we're going to be clear about what that number is, and we're going to explain in detail how that number will work in each different area: family visas, work visas, the NHS, all the rest of it. We're working through that detail. But what I'm not going to do is just shoot from the hip and make up some number because it sounds good without having done the proper serious work.
Well, I wouldn't want it to be made up. You have had quite a lot of time to think of a number, but let's move on. Now, why hasn't the whip been removed from Tory peer Lord Hamilton after he claimed that British Jews should pay for a Holocaust memorial because, quotes, they have an awful lot of money? The Conservatives themselves have said that his comments are completely unacceptable and, quotes, flagrantly anti-Semitic. Why is he still in the Lords then?
Well, that's obviously a matter for the House of Lords Chief Whip. That's for them to decide and to answer. But I do agree those comments. I think those comments are completely unacceptable. They're disgraceful. The Holocaust was a terrible, terrible stain on global history, and actually all of us together should remember that and honour the victims and critically learn the lessons. That's a matter for the House of Lords Chief Whip. But his comments, what I'll tell you is that his comments are completely unacceptable. I've told you his comments are completely unacceptable, and. Well, I'm not the Lord's Chief Whip, so that's not for me to decide. But those comments are, frankly, totally unacceptable.
OK. On reform...
That is my opinion. You asked me on my opinion, that's what it is.
Well, you haven't given me an opinion. You haven't said whether the whip should be removed or not. You've just delegated it to the person in charge of the Lords. But I'm just asking you as a Conservative. This is a fellow Conservative. It's flagrantly anti-Semitic. Should he have the whip removed? Just asking for your opinion on it.
OK, well, I'm saying that's somebody else's decision, but I think the comments are completely disgraceful. Right,
OK. Reform. Now, have you had any defections to the Tories? Have you had any members coming your way from Reform after this argument between Rupert Lowe and the rest of the party?
So I haven't seen the figures. What I do know is that we've won 5 times more by-elections in Reform since the election. And I also know that Rupert Lowe said last week what everyone else has been thinking, which is that Reform is essentially a protest party without properly thought-through ideas, led by, in Rupert Lowe's words, a Messianic leader. He said they're not a serious party.
Will you
and then what happened just a few hours late, Just a few
Rupert
hours
Lowe a role
later,
in the
he got
Conservatives
kind of
then?
stabbed in the back. Well, I don't think he's applied to join, but he's been clearly stabbed in the back by his own party, and there's only 5 of them in Parliament, and they're fighting like rats in a sack already,
Yes.
just demonstrating
Who does
that they
that
don't
remind you of,
have the
Mr.
serious
Philp?
ideas to take the country forward.
That phrase was once used about the Conservatives, wasn't it, Mr. Philp? Fighting like rats in a sack.
Well, it was once used, Camilla. Yes, it was once used. But if you look at the last few months since Kemi Badenoch became leader, you will have seen a party that actually is united.
Okay.
The infighting has ended, and we are united as a party, and we're developing serious ideas like the repeal of the Human Rights Act for immigration matters that we're announcing today.
All right.
And there are more announcements coming in the days ahead as well. We're doing the serious work to sort out these serious problems and oppose this awful Labour government that's lost control of our
Okay.
borders.
Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning.